Hello. This is Charlotte. This is something I experienced at my accommodation while working in Macau, China, around the time I was 21. I experienced other things too, but I had the most incidents at that specific accommodation. Since it remains vividly in my memory, I want to tell you about it. I will start the story now. At that time, I was doing office work in Macau, China. Actually, I am of Manchu descent. Since Manchu people like me or Thai people were a minority there, we used to rent an apartment together to use as our accommodation. However, our boss told us to save money since our salaries were low. He mentioned that an acquaintance of his had a vacant, villa-like annex house. So, we ended up moving in and commuting from that house. The house itself felt like a nice 3-story vacation home, and it was so wonderful. We couldn't bear to stay there completely for free, so we were paying a little bit of rent in yuan. There were about 3 couples living there. Besides them, there were single men and women staying separately. At that time, there was only one single room on the 3rd floor. Because it had an ensuite bathroom inside, I ended up using that room all by myself. The 3rd floor also had access to the rooftop. People frequently went up and down because they often dried their laundry on the rooftop. At first, when I moved into the house, despite the excellent natural lighting, I felt extremely chilly. I thought I was just physically unwell at the time, but no matter how bright and warm the house was, it always felt too cold to me. I also felt that the house had an unsettling, bad energy. Since it was my first time experiencing something like this, I assumed I was just imagining things and continued living there. However, about a week after moving in, I had my door open. I was watching someone walk toward the balcony. I clearly saw the back of one of the people from a couple living with us going out to the balcony. I asked, "Where are you going?" I stayed still, assuming she was just going out to hang the laundry. But I only saw her go in and never saw her come out. I thought it was strange and wondered if I had seen it wrong, so I asked about it later. It turned out that it was the weekend, so everyone else had gone out shopping, and I was the only one in the house. So I just figured I must have hallucinated. Still, because my room was on the top floor, the lighting was excellent, but the room was always chillingly cold even in broad daylight. It gave me a very uncomfortable feeling, so I rarely stayed in my room on weekends. Then, one weekend, I was feeling so unwell that I had to stay in my room. I was taking a nap during the day. My wardrobe was facing my bed, and it had a mirror attached to it. I felt such an unpleasant sensation from that mirror that I suddenly opened my eyes. My body immediately froze in place. In the mirror, there was a man wearing a suit. I still remember his appearance. His hair was styled very neatly, like in an ID photo. He was staring right at me and smiling menacingly. I thought to myself, what is this? Is this sleep paralysis? I tried to move, but my body wouldn't budge. I was struggling alone for a while when someone came and woke me up. It was one of the older women staying at the accommodation with us. She asked, "What's wrong with you?" and I told her what happened. She suggested that maybe I wasn't feeling well, so I just brushed it off, thinking my physical condition was poor. However, the next night, while sleeping, I saw the exact same figure again. I suffered from this for over a week, even during the daytime on my days off. I started wondering if something was wrong with the room. Until then, our boss had never visited our accommodation. But according to him, he could sense spiritual entities and things like that. As soon as he entered the house for the first time, he immediately asked, "Has anything happened to you guys?" He said he had a bad feeling about the place. When he asked if anything was wrong, I told him what I had been experiencing. He said it was very strange. Still, it didn't seem serious enough to call a shaman, and since it was just a temporary accommodation, we decided to just keep staying there. I also agreed to try staying a bit longer, thinking it might just be because of my poor health. Then, one day, I suddenly felt a strong urge to rearrange my room's layout. Unlike the other rooms where you wore shoes on the floor, my room had a tatami-style floor, so there was a slight step up to walk barefoot. My bed was on top of that. When I pushed the bed to change its direction, I saw a small door on the floor underneath it. It was a square-shaped door. It had been hidden by the bed, so I never knew it was there. I was so startled that I called all the older women who were at the accommodation at the time. I told them I felt very unsettled and scared. But they just kept teasing me to scare me on purpose. They joked, "What if a corpse pops out when you open it?" Because of that, I couldn't bring myself to open it. I wanted to see what was inside, but I was terrified of seeing something horrific, so I lived like that for about half a month without opening it. But during that time, I kept getting sleep paralysis with the exact same vision every 2 or 3 days. Since I always saw it through the mirror, I thought the wardrobe might be the problem, so I moved it completely out of sight in a different direction. But strangely, whenever I opened my eyes, the wardrobe appeared to be in its original place, and I kept seeing that figure in the mirror. I eventually thought the floor door might be the cause, so I gathered a few people from the house and we opened it together. When we opened it, there honestly wasn't much inside. There were just leftover wallpaper and pieces of flooring. But among those things, I saw something small and white. I wondered what it was and picked it up. It turned out to be an ID photo. The man in the photo was the exact same man I kept seeing every time I had sleep paralysis. He looked exactly the same and wore the identical outfit. So, I reported this to our boss. I explained that since it was his acquaintance's house, I found this photo and that I was suffering from sleep paralysis day and night. The boss called his acquaintance to ask about it. It turned out that the current owners had bought the house but lived overseas for a long time, so they had barely stayed there for even a few days. So, they managed to track down and contact the previous owner before them. When they asked the previous owner if they knew the man in the ID photo, they said it was their son. They explained that the son had passed away from an illness in that house. That specific room used to be his room. Hearing this, my boss tried to reassure me, saying, "I don't think he intended to harm you." He added, "If he wanted to hurt you, he would have made things much harder for you, but since you aren't physically sick, I think we just need to hold a small memorial service for him." A few days later, they set a date and prepared a memorial table in front of the house. They gave me some incense to hold. Since it was a detached house, the front and backyards were quite large. I was told to walk 1 lap around the house. After doing that and performing a simple memorial ritual, nothing strange ever happened again. Looking back now, it still feels very unsettling, and I was terrified at the time. Anyway, that was my experience. The Macau area itself is quite humid, and there is no winter there. It doesn't snow there. I heard it might snow once every 10 years if at all. I never used to believe in these things either, but after experiencing it multiple times there, I got curious. I watched various programs and did some research, and they said humid places tend to attract more ghosts and spirits. So I think that's why I particularly experienced those things in that region. To describe the spirit's appearance a bit more specifically, he looked to be in his 30s. He was wearing a white dress shirt with a few buttons undone. His jacket wasn't black, it was a dark gray color. He always appeared wearing the exact same clothes and with the exact same face. His hair was slightly parted and brushed back a bit. At first, I was really scared because I thought maybe a murder had taken place there. But after finding out that he had simply passed away from an illness, I honestly felt a bit sorry for him. Because of that sympathy, I felt a lot less frightened. I ended up living there for another year before moving out. I never experienced sleep paralysis there again after that. That concludes the first story. Here is the second story. I had been working at that company for at least 3 or 4 years when the boss suggested we go on a company workshop. It was supposed to be a team building retreat, so we rented a vacation home in another area for about a week. The boss arrived late because he was coming from a trip to another location, so we arrived at the accommodation first. That house also had a distinctly chilling vibe. I still remember how strangely my body felt, half of it went completely numb. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I even said out loud, "This house is too weird, I don't want to go in." But the others reasoned, "Isn't it just because people don't live here often?" We quickly unpacked our bags and had to stick to the schedule. We also had a scheduled time to discuss work-related matters with each other. So we decided that those who wanted to rest could take a break until the boss arrived. There was no space to sleep on the first floor, it only had a living room and a kitchen. The bedrooms were from the second floor upwards. On the second floor, between 2 bedrooms, there was another small living room area diagonally across. Since Chinese people love mahjong, the older women were all out there playing it. I left my door open and briefly fell asleep in the room. I had fallen asleep lying on my side, watching them play. While in that exact position, I got sleep paralysis again. I thought, what is this? Why is this happening again? The feeling was terrible. Unlike the sleep paralysis in the previous house, my body physically hurt this time. My solar plexus was in pain. I wanted to move but couldn't, so I looked down toward my feet. In that room, the air conditioner was located at the foot of the bed, leaving a gap of about 2 handspans between it and the wardrobe. I felt like something was staring at me from that gap, so I kept staring back at it. Since my body wouldn't move, I could only roll my eyes and blink, desperately trying to break out of the paralysis. Then, when I suddenly opened my eyes, a little ghost girl was sitting directly on my chest. It wasn't just one, there were about 2 little girls. They were wearing white dresses and looked like those pretty little girls you often see floating around the internet, with blunt bangs and bobbed hair. They were looking at me, smiling, and pretending to pinch me. But every single spot they pretended to pinch actually caused me physical pain. It was so agonizing, but there was no one to wake me up, so I just kept groaning. It felt like at least 30 minutes had passed to me. But the woman who eventually came to wake me up said I hadn't even been asleep for 10 minutes. She woke me up because I was dripping with so much cold sweat that my blanket was soaked, asking, "What's wrong with you?" I told them I hated the house so much that I'd rather go sleep in a hotel. But there were no hotels nearby, it was an isolated coastal resort area. So they suggested, how about trying a different room then? But I absolutely loathed the idea of sleeping in that house at all. However, the couples had to use the other rooms, and there was a separate room for the women, but there was no space for me to sleep there. So I had no choice but to sleep in that same room. When it was time to go to bed that night, I was so terrified that I purposely left the lights on. But even with the lights on, I got sleep paralysis again that night. I stared at the exact same spot again, and I got that chilling feeling that someone was watching me from there. I kept repeating the process of blinking my eyes, and I experienced the exact same dream, or paralysis, where the little girls hung on to me and tormented me. After going through that twice on just the first day, I couldn't bear to stay there anymore, so I told my boss. My boss took one look and immediately said, "There's something very dirty in this house." He ordered everyone to pack their bags and get out immediately, saying we shouldn't stay there. So we barely managed to survive one night there before leaving. I asked the boss about it later, and he said the land itself had terrible energy, which he felt the moment he walked in. He described it as a place infested with miscellaneous evil spirits, admitting he had made a mistake in choosing that accommodation. We really couldn't stay there for more than one night. I was the only one who experienced so many of these things. Yes, that place was also in Hong Kong. Since our boss was so good at sensing these weird energies, we always asked him if he could check out any future accommodations before we rented them. Of course, he would come and take a look whenever he had the time. But since the housing prices and monthly rent in yuan were so expensive there, it was honestly very daunting to even think about moving. He did come to check things out about once or twice. Other than that, we just managed the house on our own. That concludes my stories. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Thank you.